So you want to make a D&D character, but there are so many options to choose from. Your race, your class, your background, and it's not quite clear how it all goes together. Even experienced players feel that way sometimes. So here's how I do it. And by the end of it, you know how to answer the 3 most common questions. What is my AC, what is my DC, and what is my HP? So let's dive into it. And all you need is pen, paper, and a couple dice.
Did someone say dice?
Okay, maybe a couple more dice. Sure. Thank you. Generally, there's 2 options how you can approach making a character. Either you just look through the options available and build something out of that inspires you, something that you think might be fun to play. Or you already have a character in mind and trying to rebuild it in the 5e framework. Maybe you want to try out a new subclass, recreate a movie character, or just roll up a character at random. Either way, you always start with a blank piece of paper. Just keep in mind that the character sheet is only the final result. On here, we can mess around, try things out, see how things work out, and play through a couple options. But before we even do that, check what is legal. The core rules are pretty much accepted on every table, but there's so many more options and an infinite world of homebrew options. So check with your DM or your group and see what is acceptable on your table. And how do we even get our stats? There's 3 main ways that people do it. That is either the standard array, which is very common if you play something like Adventures League or official games. There's also point buy, which is fairly balanced, that guarantees that nobody's like way different from another character. Or of course you can roll for your stats, which is what I usually do and what we're gonna do today because it's kind of the most fun. It is very random and can lead to some unexpected results, but it can also heavily influence how you play that character. And that is where I usually start, by just rolling the dice 6 times and see what you get out of it. For each stat, you're just gonna roll the dice and take the lowest number away. Add everything else up and write that on a piece of paper. So this is a 9. Not too great, not too bad. Do that 5 more times. Okay, I think this is the best possible outcome you could hope for. There you have it, a 9, a 10, an 11, a 14, an 18, and a 16. That is not too shabby, and I would argue this is on the stronger side. We will have 1 negative modifier as of right now, but I'm pretty sure we can move numbers around to be above average, let's say that. And the next step to figure this out is gonna be choosing our race. I'm gonna be building a Dwarven Cleric for today. This is very plain, very vanilla, very standard. It was my very first character. I'm just gonna rebuild it again to see what happens. The race you choose gives you all your physical traits and inherent abilities. Every race gets some bonuses to an ability score. It also determines your speed, your size, and your age range. There are other important informations in there, but I usually come back for that a little bit later. And under the new rules introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, you can also ignore the ability score improvement that is written down and move it around. So that allows you to take any ability score bonus and apply to another stat. As always, you can't go above 20 and you can't apply 1 bonus twice. That way you can customize a character to fit the story you want to tell. And you could play a scrawny orc, a beardless dwarf, or a fat tabaxi, and your stats will reflect that. Whichever way you choose, make sure to write down the bonuses that you do have. So under the standard rules, every dwarf gets a +2 in Constitution, and I'm gonna stick with that. I'm gonna go with the average hill dwarf as it's written in the book. And being a hill dwarf, I also got a +1 in Wisdom. For now, I'm only focusing on the stats really, but I'm gonna write down all the other bonuses just to keep in mind for later. Now we can look at our class, and this is what determines what you can do and how you can do it. There's always a quick build section that shows you the important stats to focus on. The class is also what gives you your hit points and hit dice, sometimes even your speed. And you also gain proficiencies and equipment from that. The proficiencies give you a bonus in a certain skill, something like stealth for example. And again, we're just gonna write down these proficiencies. And keep in mind when you choose a class that they range from very simple to play to a little bit more complex. out of all of the things that the class gives you, there's only one choice you have to make, and that is which proficiency to choose. As a cleric, you can be proficient in 2 skills, and that could be history, insight, medicine, persuasion, or religion. And I would most likely go for insight and persuasion, but let's wait till we choose our background to make a final decision. The background is what gives you more adventuring gear, skill proficiencies, and determines your wealth at the start, which can have an impact on how you experience the game as a whole. It is basically what your character has done before becoming an adventurer, but don't get too caught up in the specifics. It isn't your backstory or anything. Many players around the table could have the same background, but be very different characters. The text in the end here is all flavor, and what matters to me is really only the proficiencies that you gain. For example, the quick build section for the cleric says you should choose the acolyte background, and that would give you skill proficiency in insight and religion. But for me, that's a little bit too cloistery, too sheltered, and I want to be something a little bit more lighthearted. That's why I've been looking at the entertainer and the folk hero. I think the entertainer would be great options if you want to be a little bit of a mischief, maybe a little rascal, or just maybe lighten up the mood every once in a while in your group. And the folk hero leads itself a little bit more to being the leader of the party. And I think this is what I'm gonna go for today. That gives me a skill proficiency in animal handling and survival, plus another artisan's tool and land vehicles, which can be really handy. To become the leader of the party that I want to be, I'm going to now choose the 2 skill proficiencies from the class, and that's going to be insight and persuasion. Now that we've made our choices, it is time for a little bit of math and assigning the stats. There's always a difference between the actual value and the modifier that generates. The value is basically how you compare to other people in the world, but it's going to come up very rarely during the game time. The modifier, which is determined by the value, is how much you can influence the roll of the dice. So if you have a baseline 10, that is your average Joe, and a 20 would be a world champion. So let's actually fill in the sheet and go top to bottom. The way I like to do is assign the important stats first. And for a cleric, that is always wisdom, as that is the spellcasting modifier that determines how effective your spells are and if they actually do hit. So the question is only, am I going to put the 18 in there for a total of 19 with our modifier? Or am I going to go for the 16 for a total of 17? And because the +1 is not going to put us over the edge, I'm actually going to go with the 16 for now, because I think wisdom is probably easier to improve than constitution. So let's put the 16 down, oh actually 17, because we have the +1. So this is gone, and that gives us a modifier of +3. We're also proficient in the wisdom saving throw. So whenever you have to make a wisdom saving throw, you can also add your proficiency bonus. But we'll get to that in a second. Now I'm gonna place that 18, because with that +2 from being a dwarf, that puts us at a 20, which is the best you can be at level 1. And that gives us a total of a +5, which will be incredibly good for our health, and that is gonna affect the character long term. Now, after distributing the top 2 skills, I look at the 2 lowest rolls and see where I want to place those. And that is a 9 and a 10. The 9 is going to give us a -1 modifier, where the 10 is a 0. So where are we the least good? And I could see that either going in intelligence, maybe he was hit on the head too many times, or into dexterity, is just a little bit clumsy. And I think that's gonna lend itself to this character having the lowest score in dexterity, even though that's kind of bad for the armor class. But with the constitution, I am willing to take that risk. Hey, D&D is all about making poor choices, right? So I am going to put the 9 in here, which is a -1 in dexterity, which you will see is not beneficial for armor class. And then I'm gonna put the 10 into intelligence. And then I'm gonna put the 14 into strength, which gives us a +2. That is really important if we wanna hit things with our melee weapons. And I'm gonna put the 11 into charisma, which is also a +0. And that is the stats done. And now we can look at our proficiencies. Now we are proficient in animal handling, survival, insight, as well as persuasion, as well as in a charisma save. Your proficiency starts at a +2 and increases at certain levels. For example, for animal handling, because it is tied to the wisdom ability, it would be a +3 plus the +2, which is a total of +5. Same for insight, and in medicine we're not proficient, so that is only a +3. Same for perception, and a +5 down here again. Over here it is almost a 0 all the way except for persuasion, where we have a +2. This is all 0. This is all -1. And athletics is a +2. And our hit dice is a 1d8. Every level you gain that class gives you 1 more hit dice. And that is exactly what determines your health points. At the very first level, you get the max roll of that dice, which would be an 8, plus your constitution modifier. So in our case, that is a total of 13. The saving throws work exactly like our skills. So if we are proficient in that saving throw, we add our modifier plus our proficiency bonus. So for wisdom, that is a +5. And for charisma, that is a +2. And everything else stays the same as it is down here. If you want, you can write that there as well. And now let's go one step further down. Your initiative bonus is always your dexterity, unless your class specifies differently. So for me, that is a -1. The walking speed is determined by our race, which is a dwarf, which is a standard 25 foot. And we don't have any climbing, flying, or swimming speed. There are some races that give you those abilities. 13, like we said, is our max HP. This is where I would put my current HP in case we are in a battle or something, and your temporary HP are some buffs that you can get throughout the game. The armor class will be determined by the type of equipment that we choose. But for now, let's look at the spell DC, which determines how effective your spells are, how easy it is for you to hit, or how difficult it is to avoid them. And that is always 8 plus the proficiency modifier plus your spellcasting modifier. So that is 8 plus 2 plus 3 for a total of 13. And this was really the hard part of making a character. And at this point is when I go back and look at all the 3 sections of what I actually get for carrying around. What is the armor? What are the tools? What are the trinkets that I have on my physical being? Because that also, the one thing is actually going to affect your character is the type of armor that you have. And that's the last little bit of math that we have to do. So in theory, we can choose from a leather armor, scale mail, and chainmail, but we're not actually proficient in chainmail. And given the -1 in dexterity, I think I'm gonna go for that scale mail for a total AC of 13, because that -1 still applies. We will have disadvantage on stealth checks, and I'm definitely gonna work on becoming a little bit less clumsy. And that's exactly what I mean by that the stats can shape the way you play your character. Now I have something that I'm not so good at, and I can incorporate in all of the role-playing elements. And my character can work towards becoming a little bit more fit, a little bit more agile, or he cannot and resent that and just be the heavy, burly dwarf he wants to be. And to recap the 3 most common questions. Your hit points come from your hit dice, which are determined by your class. At the beginning, that's the maximum you can have on that dice, plus your constitution modifier. And you roll for it when you level up. If I would level up right now, I'm gonna roll a d8 for a measly 2, but I add my +5 of constitution modifier and have a +7, which gives us a total of 20 at level 2. Your AC is determined by the type of armor that you are wearing and is often tied to dexterity as well, but not always. And don't forget the shield if you have one. And your spellcasting DC is 8 plus proficiency plus your spellcasting modifier. And you can now roll for your flaws, bonds, and a deal if that is something you enjoy. Otherwise, make up your own story. Finally, choose your weapons and your spells, but that could be a whole video in itself. I hope this explanation got you ready for adventure. So should you choose to accept this quest, hit the subscribe button on the way out, and I might just have a little reward for when you return.